When I woke up on Saturday morning, the 6th of April 2024, and I opened my curtains in my loft and I looked out of my loft window, I expected to see a lawn with some puddles. It had been raining a lot. What I saw instead was a lake. Tiny G was sitting right in the middle of a lake. It stopped raining, it was lovely and sunny, and so I really didn't think much of it. I'd actually slept right through the whole night with terrible, terrible rains. So I went downstairs and realized I was going to make myself a cup of tea, and I turned the kettle on and the power was out. So I was like, oh, a fuse has tripped. And I knew that I would need to go to the front of the property where the fuse box is. And so I opened my blinds in front of the door and my stairs were gone. They were to the side of the house and they were made out of a few pallets and they were really heavy. And I was like, what happened? And I could see all the water. I managed to grab my gumboots and my wellies, and I sloshed to the front and opened the fuse box, and yes, the switch for the back of the property had tripped. So I turned it back on and it immediately tripped. And as you do, I tried it a few times. It's like, if it doesn't work first time, maybe it will do something differently next time. But it kept tripping. So I sloshed back. And on my way back, I realized that there were some things in the backyard that were no longer where they were before. The garbage bins were out the back. And a vegetable patch with plants in it that I planted not that long ago had also completely intact moved to the back of the property, is set against the fence. There was a big pole that was lying initially next to there's a little shed right here, and it was one of those big poles that a part of a pole for electricity, you know, one of those really big ones, was also at the back of the property. It didn't really register because at that point in time, my worry was about I needed to get the power back on. So I contacted the property owner. Her husband came. He fixed it because it was the washing machine was plugged into a power point, and that power and where that was flooded, and the power point had flooded, so that had tripped the fuse. So I had power, and I made myself a coffee. And as I was drinking my coffee, I was looking out onto the backyard and I started to see some really odd things. So I put the gumboots back on, went outside, and realized how high the water had come. Now, the night before, the weeks leading up to this event had been very wet, lots of rain, and the ground was absolutely saturated. And at the beginning of the week, we'd had a warning that there was a major rain event forecast. At least 200 millimeters of water would fall, if not more, and the area that I was in had a flood warning. And I didn't think much of it. I look after my daughter's rabbit and guinea pig, and they are outside in a hutch, and I'd cover them up. I always do that when it rains so that they sit nice and dry. And I'd gone to bed, and I couldn't sleep, and I was really worried because I thought, what happens if there is a bit of flooding? Then the rabbit will go upstairs in the hutch because he's happy to go up, but the guinea pig refuses to go up. And I thought, oh, okay. And I really felt uncomfortable. So went back downstairs, got a big umbrella because it was really raining at that point. And I go outside and I locked the rabbit and the guinea pig both upstairs, so they couldn't get down. So I covered it back up, and the food was upstairs, the water was upstairs, had a nice bed of straw, so it's all good. And I went back inside, went to bed, and fell asleep. And when I woke the next morning, I really had no idea how bad it had gotten. It wasn't until I went to check on the rabbit and the guinea pig when I noticed that there was the mud and gunk had gotten all the way up to the top of, or the bottom of their top layer. They had wet feet, but they had not gotten completely wet, so they were okay. And then I walked around and I noticed how high the water had come. And here's some photos of where the mud line was on the fence, where the mud line was on the shed that is on the property. I didn't take a photo of the mud line on Tiny. And here is what I would like you to guess is how far did the water come? Fortunately, it didn't get to, in this image, the top, where the top arrow is. It just stayed about 2 centimeters under the bottom of Tiny. So I had really had a lucky escape, because if it had been higher, water would have come in just from under the door. So it was interesting because later that day, I got a delayed panic attack. And all of a sudden I realized what could have happened. Fortunately, after that event, and there was a lot of flooding. The town was flooded. There was a lot of areas in Australia, in New South Wales, were flooded. So it was really quite bad. Took a couple of months to clean up outside and find things that had moved and put things back where they belonged. And then in June, we were told there was another rain event coming. And again, why do these things happen at night? The worst was going to be at night. I didn't sleep a wink. I was in bed, but I was glued to my phone to watch the flood warnings and to watch the rain radar. We did get some flooding, but it was fairly minimal. Rabbit and the guinea pig by that stage had died of old age. Nothing other than that. But the rabbit was fine. The cage was fine. Nothing had moved. But I had that intense anxiety all night. And then a couple of weeks ago, we started to get lots of rain, and it felt very familiar to April, and I could feel the anxiety building. And then the prediction was that on the Friday, and we only found out probably the day before, there was going to be a storm cell that was going to come across. And this time it happened in the afternoon, and I was watching on my rain radar app. I was watching this storm cell coming over, and then for 20 minutes I just looked outside and saw about 80 millimeters of rain fall in a 20-minute period. And because it was during the day, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I could watch what was happening with the water on the land. Because it had happened before at night, I had no idea where the water came from, other than from the sky. And so this time I could actually see where the water started to pool. And I discovered something really, really interesting. Tiny G is exactly placed in this yard in the worst spot when it comes to rain. It's like I'm in a lovely bowl, and so most of the water comes where I am. So fantastic. couldn't have picked a worse spot. And so this time the water disappeared fairly quickly. I had to go out to dinner with my daughter, and when I came back, all the water was gone. It was still kind of soppy and stuff, but the actual water was gone. So I've learned some things, but I have to say, during that 20 minutes, I was absolutely taken over by anxiety. I felt completely helpless and I had no idea what to do. But after the fact, I did some serious reflection, and I have now come up with some things that, should we get a warning for another serious rain event, here's what I'm going to do. First of all, I have a cage for the rabbit that can come inside. So, well in advance, I'm going to get the rabbit inside, because the worry about an animal that can't do anything, that is kind of helpless, was really what partly triggered a lot of that anxiety. So, rabbit coming inside. The other things that I did was, what I considered was, where will water come into the tiny, or how will water come into the tiny once it reaches a certain height of flooding? And what I realized is that a big part will be the doors. So the bottom of the doors is obviously the lowest in terms of, the windows are much higher, so that's not very likely, but the door is quite likely to take in water. So I'll need sandbags. I will probably also need to tie down, I now have a little porch out the front, but at least make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. So I might need some pickets to try to secure that better in place, so that also the sandbags are able to stay in front of the door. So if we get a warning, there will be warning up quite early on, so that I can get the sandbags. It will be a priority. But the other part that water can get into the house is through the plumbing. Because I am not on sewage, I have a grey water system. The water it's not a sealed off connection between my shower, for example, and the sewage. So there's just there's out of the water out of the shower, there's a drain, and that goes into then into a hose that goes into the garden. So water can come back in as well. So I need a cap to put over that, so that the water can't come in, because that would be horrendous to water come out of the shower drain. And the same with the drain from the kitchen sink, because it goes in, at the moment it goes into a and I'll make a video about that, my whole grey water system at some point. It goes into a worm farm. Now, I hate to think that my little worms will drown, but I'm not going to bring in my worm farm into the house, besides the fact the thing is very heavy. But I can turn the sort of the drain up and put a cap on that as well, so that there's no water coming in there. And then there's the water from the washing machine that just drains straight into a hose, and I can bring the hose up really high, so that the water actually doesn't come in. So I feel much better that I have some practical things I can do to minimize any sort of risk of the house itself getting flooded. I'm enormously grateful that I live in a tiny house on wheels, because the fact that I'm so much higher off the ground meant in April that no water came into the house. Had I been on a normal slab, I would have been flooded, and that would have been really, really unpleasant. I'm still anxious about the rain. I find that I'm checking the weather app a lot to see what rain is predicted, and I'm very relieved that we've got quite a long period ahead of us, I think, with dry weather, which means that the ground can dry out, and it's easier to get rid of water. But I'm prepared. I need to go to the hardware store. I need to get some caps. I need to work out how I can get some sandbags quickly when I need them. And then I can only keep my fingers crossed that I will never have to go through this again. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been through like a severe weather event or have to deal with floodwaters? Let me know how you, if you have any ideas as to what you can do to try and stop any damage happening. I really like to get some other ideas as well if you have them. So feel free to put anything like that in the comments. Next week's video, much more cheerful. I'm going to talk to you about how living in a tiny house has changed my life.